Is this Washington offense better or worse than 2021, 2022 Ohio State with CJ Stroud, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka? I thought this was a very interesting question.
I'd say
because
worse, right?
I think the talent cumulatively has to be worse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I think the way they execute it is worse. I think that Washington gets a bigger, better grade for play design. I think Washington gets a better grade for situational play calling. I think Washington gets a better grade on executing even when it looks like the play is breaking down. And I do think that it's an interesting dichotomy because Ohio State, for all the talent that they had there that you listed, to me, never played peak football. They have nothing to show for those players. And that's a hard thing to say to an Ohio State.
Right? The Georgia game was pretty close.
If you think that the Georgia game is close, is like paying off the talent that they have for the people who watch the game.
No, I'm talking about that game was close to the peak version of them.
Yes,
doing that,
and it was, and had Ohio State played that way against Michigan a month before,
they might not have had to play
Georgia. So, that. But I do think that I would take the players on the Ohio State side. I would take the coaching, play design, aggressiveness, just knowing who you are and everything that Washington does over them. But the question is, and I said this before the season, and I'm wrong about this, but I said Michigan is more built to win the Big Ten and beat Ohio State than it is to win a national championship. And I thought that was an apt point. Like, they know how to beat Ohio State. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh owns real estate in Ryan Day's head, and that has come to fruition on the field. And then when they play Georgia or Alabama in a neutral site game in the playoff, then that will rear its ugly head because they don't have the athletes. That's wrong. That's wrong. I think that Michigan is actually built to beat anybody. We're talking about two very different teams here. The Washington team that showed up or that shows up in Houston is much different than the Alabama team that showed up last week. And I think they're able to beat both. I mean, what is your take on that?
We still haven't seen this Michigan team this year against an elite offense. And I think you're right. I think that was a good way to put it, comparing that sort of 2-year amalgamation of Ohio State talent and what Michigan did to them. But they just bullied them on the line and kept those guys off the field a lot of the time. I think in general...
And what do you think they're going to try to do now?
Well, sure, they'll try to do that. But my point is, I don't know that you're guaranteed to slow them down. This group has not played anything close to an offense like this. And so I'm very curious how they can match up. There's certainly experience there, past experience, all of those things in previous years. But this team, as currently composed, has not done that. And I think you look at the advanced numbers, look at some advanced numbers from Michigan's DBs. It's pretty impressive. Will Johnson, saying we're still those guys. Not to belabor the point, Ari, I've been saying it since like October. I look at those numbers and I say, that's impressive. But then I look at who they play, and I'm
going to go to the bathroom
while Dave goes on
Big Ten West rant, everyone.
I'm just saying, Ari. I'm just saying. Like, I think to take anything that you have seen this year from that secondary and apply it to what that means for how they play, this trio of receivers and Jack Westover and Michael Penix, I think is a fool's errand. I think they can slow them down, but I think it's going to be a new challenge in a different league because, again, it is impressive to beat Alabama and compete with them in the way that they did in the trenches. But it's the same thing we've been saying about Alabama all year. They don't have a precision passer. They don't have skill position talent. They don't have a back that can really beat you up. They have average backs. They have sort of above average receivers, no elite guy. And Jalen Milroe, they figured out how to use him. And he was, the way that he uses his legs opens things up downfield. Jalen Milroe, is still very limited as a passer. Go ask Auburn what that looks like. So I just think it doesn't really translate. It's just a completely different challenge than what they face against Alabama. What they did is impressive in its own right, but this is different.
It's a little bit more complex, too, because the question here, and the OG Brown here posted this on the chat here, and if we could put that up. The idea that Michigan can't play in a shootout is so overblown. Michigan can put 50 when needed, but they intentionally stick to a clock management style because it utilizes all their strengths. I think we've seen Michigan score 50 a lot against overmatched opponents. I don't think we've seen Michigan score 50 against
on
really
short
good teams
fields.
very often.
On short fields, it should be noted.
But I do think that the defense and the way he said Michigan was built to beat those teams. He didn't say Michigan was built to defend those teams, Dave. So you also have to take into account that maybe Michigan's offense shows up in this game, controls the ball on the ground very much, and then Penix just doesn't have as many possessions.
But I referenced this in the preview show, Ari. What % chance would you put a Michigan victory if they are down double digits at any point in the first half? 20?
I mean, they were 20 probably. I mean, but I would do that for anybody in a national title game. I mean,
I wouldn't do that. No, the odds would be much higher if you had a better offense, a offense capable of explosive plays that can turn a game in a second. And one of these teams in this game has that. And one of these teams has a reliable quarterback that can make plays down the field and flip a game in a hurry. And they don't have that. So I think this is going to be a very game script dependent game where if Michigan gets up early, I think both teams will be comfortable, and I think it'll be a close game. Like Washington, if they go down double digits, I'd still say 40, 35%, depending on context in the first half of them coming back.
Well, just a matter of whether or not you still subscribe to the notion that you have to have big offense to win a national championship. Maybe not quarterback, but big offense.
You have to have big offense, but you need to have a capable offense. I think Michigan has a capable offense that has been good enough to this point, and it'll be up to their offensive line and their defense for how good their offense has to be in this game. They're capable.
Average points per game is 26 against ranked opponents. Thanks, Cam. I appreciate you giving us that stat. I do think that there is this notion that they are built to beat Ohio State, but weren't built to win the college football playoff. And then funny enough, they're not playing Georgia right now. They're playing a team that has offense like Ohio State has had. So I think that would make me feel better. It's not like they're going to be facing a team with these players that have insane snap counts like that are unfamiliar with the skill position talent as if they haven't played Marvin Harrison a month ago.
If they were going to be like, it's not like they're unfamiliar. If they were playing a Georgia team though, with Carson Beck and Brock Bowers and Dom Lovett and Ra Thomas and those guys, I mean, I wouldn't like their odds at all in that game. For a lot of reasons.
Because of the whole picture.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is an interesting game. I think it's going to be very game script heavy, but Georgia is a more complete team. I mean, we don't need to.
I think that we're going to probably have a pretty good notion of who's going to win this game by middle of the second quarter.
I think you're probably right. Actually, that's a good point. I think that's probably true. Because if Michigan's getting 6 to 8 yards a clip every time they're just turning around and handing it to Corum, say goodnight. It's done.
Yeah,
it's done. Yeah. You got to have to adjust or do something. But if that's happening, that's going to be tough to change, and that is going to be a problem. If Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk and Jack Westover, they can't cover them down the field, but you're going to have to score 50 to win the game.
Well, let me ask you this, and then we have to move on. But Dave, let's say both of these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan's getting 8 yards a clip, running the ball on offense. Washington can't stop them. And Michigan's secondary can't cover those receivers, and they are just throwing all over Michigan.
Michigan wins because Michigan does, because that's just way more reliable. You can control the clock a little bit more that way. Then when that's happening, you open up everything else down the field. So then Michigan's going to start hitting some big plays on the field. If you're running the ball that well, that's a wrap.
Or it might come down to turnovers too.
Yeah,
because sometimes teams that run the ball really well, 6 or 8, if you're pounding the ball, the chances of turning it over on a fumble increase too, if you're like controlling the game clock that way. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I guess
ask Texas how that works out. I mean, they were moving the ball on the ground no problem last week and lost because they kept
not like that. Not like we're talking about.
I mean, they were moving the ball quite easily on them.
I believe it wasn't like Texas 180, so it was good. It wasn't like just getting absolutely hammered.
It didn't strike me as Texas wasn't able to move the ball at all in that game.
Well, Texas didn't lean enough on their running game. I thought that live, and then when we were doing that coaches confidential, a lot of the coaches we talked to were like, "What was Texas doing? Just run the ball. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
So,
scoring 50 via 6 touchdowns against an overpowered defense is not the winning in a shootout.
And it's short field. You're getting the ball at midfield because you pin them at the 20, and then it's 4th and 16, and they punt it, and you run it